All right, well, welcome everyone. It's good to be back here at Grace Fellowship Church and just for the second day of training. And I know some of our students are joining us online. We actually have more online participants than people in the room. And so, but we have students from all around the country who study with us. And so we made this available to them. And so it's always a great opportunity whenever we're able to. It's fun for me as a staff leader to kind of get our staff together and think about important topics like how do we help the next generation? How do we care for young people? And so we've just been really focused the last 6 months on writing resources and writing materials and kind of capturing some of, I think, God's heart for how do we care for young people? Because I just feel like it's one of the most important mission fields of the church. And it's critical that we, as a church, are able to care for young people and give them real answers. And, I think about I was a youth pastor for 10 years in Naperville prior to becoming a counselor. And one of the things that shifted during that time is that young people increasingly found counsel outside their home. And they found counsel, where'd they find it? Right here, right? So like Instagram and TikTok and other places became the means by which young people were answering the tough questions of life, right? And sometimes as a church we can feel intimidated by that because you can't do things as fancy as a TikTok star, right? And you can't make it look as glitzy as Instagram. Yet when our young people grow and when they go through the trials of life, that influencer isn't there for them in the way that you can be as a parent, as a friend, as a youth worker. And God calls us to walk with our young people. I was sitting this week in my office with a young teen who had just been put in their 25th placement in foster home. Now you imagine what you're going through when you're put in your 25th home. And this 25th home says, we want to adopt her. Right? Yet they've been warned by the system and others that this might not go real well, right? And we're working through to some of the dynamics, and yet I love the heart of a family who says, we want to adopt a kid out of the system, right? But I also know, if churches aren't ready to work with young people who are going through trials and temptations and difficulties, that can turn into a tornado really quickly. And it doesn't have to be an adoption story. It doesn't have to be a crazy foster care story. Sometimes it's just our own teens who get caught up by circumstances and the wrong influences. And so what I want to talk this morning in just kind of addressing the whole day, and we're going to be doing some workouts or workshops later on teens and on kind of preparing premarital situations. But what I want to talk about is the approach of Proverbs and what I would call kind of the wisdom approach. How does Proverbs give us a roadmap on how to care for young people? And because I think Proverbs actually gives us a lot of insight into how we might approach the problems and solutions that we give to young people. And so a few years ago, a counselor by the name of Rick Horn wrote an article, and he described sitting across from a mother and her teenage son. And this mother was just kind of at the end of her rope. She was just frustrated, right? He's like, my son John is so unmotivated. He just won't do anything, right? He's grounded. He can't use the car. He's on academic probation. He's ineligible for the wrestling team now. We've said he can't talk to his girlfriend anymore. And nothing seems to motivate him. Sounds like a lot of teenagers, right? Kind of stuck in their stubborn moment. Now, Rick was the counselor, and he looked at John, and then he looked at the mother, and he said something that probably none of us would have thought of. He said, John, I don't mean to show disrespect to your mother, but I couldn't disagree with your mom more. I've never seen a student more motivated than you. What Rick saw in that room is what the book of Proverbs has been doing for 3,000 years. Now, this boy leaned forward and he started to listen. It's like, you're grounded. You lost the car. You lost your job hours. You're off the wrestling team. You can't see your girlfriend. And you're still doing all the things that cost you those privileges. And that's pretty remarkable motivation. You wanted something so bad that you committed yourself to enduring pretty remarkable pain to get it. And then very quietly he says, I can only imagine what you could do with your life, John, if you decided to use that kind of intensity to get after something that didn't bring you loss and trouble. And let's sit in that moment for a second, right? Because something happened in that room that happens in every book of Proverbs on every page. A young person who had tuned out every adult in his life was suddenly leaning forward. And the counselor hadn't really even corrected him. He hadn't rebuked him. He hadn't told him what was wrong. He had named what was right. He had found the desire underneath the behavior. And so what I want to do in the next kind of time with you is show you what Rick did in that room and what God's been doing in his word for 3,000 years, and it's how wisdom works, not just with teenagers, with children, with young adults, with those who are seeking to get married, with anyone whose heart is still being formed. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So Rick Horn described what he talked about as the 5 to 10 minute problem. And it's one of the most honest sentences as he begins his article that I've ever read. It's like the counselor who tries to identify the young person's problem for them and then offer their own solutions, even biblical solutions, doesn't have to wait very long, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and they'll see the conversation fail. So if you come into a counseling situation, you come into an influence situation, and it's like, well, I'm going to tell you what the problem is, and I'm going to tell you what the solution is. Well, you don't get much of a hearing, okay? And so it doesn't just happen with teenagers, it happens at every age, right? It's the parent who lectures the 8-year-old about sharing. Well, how well does that lecture go? The child stopped listening by sentence 3. It might be the youth pastor who opens his Bible to a passage about a teenager's specific sin, and the teen's already decided this is a sermon. And you're preaching me the second sermon tonight. And the mentor who gives the young adult a list of what to do differently in their dating relationship, and the young adult smiles and nods, but they're still dealing with the longings of their heart. So the pattern is the same at every age. We pick the problem, we prescribe the solution, and we lose them, not because our counsel is wrong, but because we're answering the wrong question. And so here's what I mean. The young person believes that most adults who try to help them do 2 things. They pick the problem, and they arrive with a diagnosis they already had in hand. And they prescribe the solution. And they have the answer before the young person has said anything. And both of those moves, before a young person has spoken, communicate all that they've heard their entire lives. You don't understand me, and you're not really interested in what I want. You, adult, are here to fix me. Like, that's your goal. What do a lot of foster kids feel? Well, they just want to fix me. They want to make me into their own image, right? I can't be me. And the moment that young person kind of smells that, whether they're 5 years old or 25 years old, sometimes politely, but quietly, but pretty decisively, the rest of the conversation is just pretend. It's not in it. They're not engaged. So John, this story from the beginning, he was not unmotivated. He was actually the most motivated person in the room. He'd endured the loss of his car, his girlfriend, his wrestling season, his freedom, and he still was doing all the things that cost him that. And you don't do that without motivation. You do that because you want something very badly. And that's true of every age. The angry 5-year-old is motivated. They have something they want, right? The anxious 10-year-old is motivated. The sexually compromised teenager is motivated. The young adult who keeps choosing the wrong relationships over and over and over again is motivated. The question is never whether they are motivated. The question is towards what? When we misdiagnose the motivation, we prescribe the wrong solution. And so we tell them to try harder. We tell them to care more. We tell them they should want what we want for them. And all of that lands on a heart that is already wanting something, just something else. And so before we open our mouth, before we open our Bible, before we think we know what this young person's problem is, we have to ask the prior question: what do they want? What is the hunger underneath the behavior? And again, we're going to get to how the gospel interacts with all this. So I want to alleviate any concern that we're simply saying we're going to allow a teenager to manipulate what they want. But we are going to recognize that God's put legitimate desires within the heart of a child that we want to nurture as parents. And that in the image of God, there is some desires that are going to be able to be met. So you think about how God taught the young, and I want to look at kind of how wisdom actually works. So if you've got your Bibles, open them up to the book of Proverbs. Does the Bible actually model for us counseling that kind of just fails in 5 minutes? Or does the Bible open its address to young people by picking their problem and prescribing a solution? So I want you to look at Proverbs 1, verse 4. The book of Proverbs is God's primary address to young people in the Old Testament. And Solomon says at the outset, he says this in verse 4, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. That word youth really spans from infancy all the way through young adulthood to independence. So Solomon's not just writing to one age group, he's writing to every age group growing up. This book isn't just for 5-year-olds, it's all the way for all of us, but particularly it's addressing the formative times of life. And Proverbs doesn't open with a catalog of sins. It doesn't lead with a whole bunch of lists of things you can't do. It does not start by telling the young person what is wrong with them. You think about the first 9 chapters of Proverbs. What are they about? The first 9 chapters of Proverbs is an appeal to wisdom, to choose wisdom. And it's this contrast that he's setting up. And so watch what wisdom's doing. Wisdom is personified as a woman in the street calling out, an image that they clearly would have understood. And what is she calling out about? She's making an appeal. She's offering something. She's holding out a treasure. She's saying, I'm offering something good to you. Now, what does that assume? Well, it assumes that like within the heart of a child, there's something, right, that wants what is good. And obviously there's this battle that's going on within our heart where we want what is selfish and we want what is good. But look at the way that Proverbs begins to appeal to even desire. Proverbs 2, verses 1 to 5. It says, my son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, make your ear attentive to wisdom and incline your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it like hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So in Proverbs 2, 1 to 5, he's telling them to seek for it like silver, like treasures, like then you will understand. So do you hear that? Solomon is saying, the thing that I'm offering to you is worth more than silver. What I'm offering to you is worth more than gold. And so he is making an appeal to the young person's desire. Like, do you want what is most valuable? Do you want what's going to work best? Do you want what is ultimately going to satisfy? Think about, go down to Proverbs 3, 13 to 15. You'll see this again. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than the gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. But again, there's this desire, right? It's not saying, okay, all your desires are bad things. But he's saying that there's a better desire there. There's something better. Wisdom is not just your duty, right? Wisdom is what you actually want. Go down to Proverbs 4, verse 8. How does he say it there? Prize her highly, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. The word honor is not incidental here. Solomon knows what every young person wants. Young people want to be thought highly of. They want to be respected. They want to be accepted. They want to be part of their group, part of their family. Young people want the affirmation of their parents. I often counsel with people later in life as they're wrestling with the impact of parenting on their on the way they were raised and kind of how it's impacted their life. And you know, people often wrestle with like being too controlling or being too laid back and just, you know, too hands off. And the reality is that when people are completely hands off, their kids really wrestle with, like, did my mom and dad, like, did they care enough, right? Like all the freedom doesn't actually leads to short-term gain in a teenager's mind, but it often leads to long-term pain. They want the respect of their child. So I want to look at kind of 7 conversations that Solomon has with every young person. And I remember my dad for years has taught here at the Counseling Center, and he actually developed a lecture on counseling teens from Proverbs. And so I will fully admit today that I'm borrowing a bunch of my dad's materials. And he did his whole dissertation on using Proverbs in biblical counseling. And so he organized, Solomon really organized it, but my dad kind of wrote about the my son passages and the my son conversations. And there's 7 times that Solomon sits down with a young person and says, in effect, let me show you how the world really works, right? And so each one of these my son passages meets a desire that can be drawn out, a desire that can be nourished and grown. So first, the first my son passage, again, keep your Bibles open here, Proverbs 1:10. It says this, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If sinners entice you, do not consent. He continues in verse 11, if they say, come with us, let us lie, wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. So he talks about friends that are clearly pulling them down the wrong road. And so there's 3 different enticements that sinners use to draw a young person in, according to Proverbs. They use excitement, they use money, and they use companionship. All right, so we're looking again at the desires of young people, right? And I used to be a youth pastor, and people were like, okay, well, why do you have to do these games at youth group, right? Like, why do you have to have youth group be a fun place? I'm like, well, because if you want to reach the heart of a young person, you connect with them through fun. Now, if all your youth group does is fun, well, you don't really effectively disciple anyone. But if your youth group is no fun, you don't disciple anyone. Right? And so the reality is there's a balance there, right? There's a balance there, and that young people feel loved through fun, through excitement, right? And so there's an enticement that comes there, right? Look at those 3. All 3 of those are desire. A young person wants excitement. A young person wants provision. You ask a teenager, do you want to be poor or rich? Well, the answer is pretty obvious, right? Who'd want to be poor? A young person wants to belong. No teenager is satisfied sitting at the lunch table alone. They may have concluded that's the safest place to be, but nobody loves it there. And so Solomon doesn't say stop wanting those things. He says the people offering you those things will destroy you. The desire is affirmed, but the pathway is exposed. Just say no. Don't go with them. Control your feet. Why? Not because the want is wrong, but because the road is wrong. And Proverbs 1:18 is pretty clear that they will reap what they sow. He says, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. So finding companionship on the wrong road leads to destruction. Finding companionship on the right road leads to life. And so we're this constant contrast that Proverbs is holding out before young people. And it's the pattern at every age. The 6-year-old who follows the troublemaker around on the playground wants the same 3 things: excitement, status, belonging. It's fun to throw rocks at windows, isn't it? It is. Trust me, I did it when I was 6, okay? I got in a lot of trouble, right? And, but it was fun, right? The 20-year-old who can't leave a toxic friend group. Well, he wants those things too. Excitement, belonging. The desire is universal. The wise pathway is what changes. So, again, he's holding out before us this contrast. The second one I want to look at is verse 8 of chapter 1. It says, hear, my son, your father's instructions, and forsake not your mother's teaching. So there's an observation here that we can't forget. He says, Proverbs distinguishes between a foolish son who brings hurt to his parents and a wise son who brings happiness to the mother, to the father. You can see some of those passages there. But what does the wise want here? The young person wants approval. They want to be well thought of. They want their parents to be proud of them. Even teenagers who act like they don't care want to know that their parents care. Solomon builds on that desire, saying the path of wisdom brings joy to your parents. The path of foolishness brings grief. He does not rebuke the desire for parental approval. He channels it. And again, so here's the counseling move. When we're sitting across from someone who's in open conflict with their parents, the instinct is to say, honor your father and mother. What are you doing? You're acting like an idiot. That's my translation. That's not the Bible's translation, okay? That's not in the ESV, like you're acting like an idiot part, okay? Maybe that's my dad voice coming through, right? Because I'm a father of 2 sons. But that's the right command. But Solomon's approach is first is like, you want your parents to be proud of you and to trust you. That's a good desire. But let me show you the road that actually gets there. The command lands differently when the desire has been named first. A third concern is in verse 7, or chapter 7. Here, Solomon is warning his sons on the whole issue of sexuality. He starts out and says, my son, keep my words and treasure my commandments within you. Then he gets down to verse 7, or verse 6. He says, for at the window of my house I've looked out through my lattice, and I've seen the simple. I perceived among the youth a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house. In the twilight, in the evening, at the nighttime, in the darkness. And behold, the woman meets him, dressed as a prostitute, wry of heart. Again, it goes on there. But it's a vivid illustration of the wise once approach. So you walk through the characteristics of the foolish woman, the adulterous woman, the sensual woman in Proverbs 7. And she appeals to all the senses. She appeals to sight, right? The way she looks, the way she sounds, the way she touches, the way she tastes, verse 14, the way she smells, verse 17, verse 18, ultimately, come, let us fill our love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. And then she even appeals to the sense, the longing, the desire for love. Okay? And so, what is this young man's desire? Well, intimacy, pleasure, love, romance. And these are not evil desires. They're put there by God for a purpose, for a season. So what's his desire? It's intimacy. God created them. But what does this strange woman do? She creates a counterfeit, a shortcut that bypasses the covenant, but it leads to destruction. In chapter 7, verse 27, it says, her house is the way to Sheol, to hell. Like the path of the foolish woman, of the adulterous woman, the sensual woman, leads the young person down a path of hell versus a path of life. And so, it's interesting here, though. Solomon doesn't say, stop wanting love. He says, let wisdom and understanding be the woman in your life, in verses 4 and 5. He said, rejoice in the wife of your youth, in Proverbs 5:18. He directs the desire towards a wise pathway. What is the wise pathway? Well, it's covenant love, faithfulness, the real intimacy that only commitment can sustain. Right? So this is what we do with every young person who's sexually compromised. We don't necessarily start out by just repeating what they already know about the consequences of sin. We start by naming the want. It's a good thing that you want to be loved. It's a good thing that you want to have relationships. It's a good thing that you want to be desired. And God put those desires within your heart. They're real longings. The question is whether the road you're actually on will get you what you want, or whether it is consuming the very thing you're chasing. Is the path you're on the path to hell, or is it on the path to light and life? And again, the path to hell looks exciting because there's a woman on the street calling out, saying, I'm offering this to you, right? What looks good, what tastes good, what smells good, what will feel good tonight. Like, I'm offering you immediate gratification. And covenant loyal love doesn't work in the same exact way. But ultimately, it leads to a better thing, a better life. And so, this doesn't just apply to sexual sin. It applies to the young adult entering a relationship too quickly. The engaged couple who cannot keep their hands off each other. The teenager who's pouring romantic relationships and is obsessed with texting that friend back and forth, right? And it's just like, I got to be close to them. I got to know what they're thinking all the time. At every age, the desire for intimacy is real, and Solomon never shames it. He redirects it towards the covenant pathway that God designed it to fulfill. Fourth one, the last one here, is just, hear my son about the steps to wisdom. Proverbs 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. So when you think about this, Solomon lays out 5 steps for pursuing wisdom. Think about the 5 steps he lays out. Step 1, choose the fear of the Lord. That if people want to pursue wisdom, they're going to have to make a choice to take God seriously. Now, ultimately, the New Testament makes that clear that taking God seriously is bowing our knee before him in repentance and coming to a point of saving faith in Christ, right? That it's acknowledging him as Lord of our life. but it's choosing the fear of the Lord. Step 2, praying and asking God for wisdom. Step 3, developing attentive, diligent, obedient listening. The word hearing appears 23 times in Proverbs. The word ear 14 times. Again, they have to be willing to take a posture of humility and being willing to listen. Step 4 is a treasure hunt. Search for wisdom like silver. And ultimately, step 5 is claiming wisdom's promises. So if you go back to Proverbs chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. How many times do you see the word if in verses 1 through 4? I want you to look at your Bible and just look at it real quick. How many times do you see the word if? It's 3 times. If you receive my words, if you call out for insight, if you seek it like silver. Verse 5, how does he conclude? He says, well, then you will understand the fear of the Lord. And so there's this contrast again. It's not this list of duties, it's a treasure map. And Solomon is saying to the young person, there's something out there worth more than anything that you're currently chasing. And Solomon is saying, I'm going to show you how to find it. And so we're working with young people to help them discover wisdom. It's interesting. One of the questions that I ask when I'm working with young people is, sometimes I receive young people who come from the local public school system, and the public school system will make a deal with parents. And the deal they'll make is this, like, we'll suspend your kid for 10 days from school, or we'll cut that suspension to 3 or 5 days if they'll agree to do five sessions of counseling. Right? So you can imagine like a teenager who gets suspended from school for 10 days, now ends up in my office and is being told, you got to do 5 sessions of counseling. And they're like, I don't even know why I'm here, right? Like what do you have to say, old man, right? That's kind of the posture they're coming with, right? And oftentimes you begin to find out, it's like, hey, what church you go to? Well, it's Saint something. Okay, good. Saint something is good, right? Yeah. Yeah, we know the guy. My mom is friends with the priest, I think, and but they don't. Saint something doesn't offer any counseling for kids, so they end up with me, right? And but one of the things that I've taken the time to do is just ask them the question. It's just I want to find out what do they value, and so like. If you were king of the world, what would you change? What would you make different if you were king of the world? And I'm like, I want you to write a list for me. And I have a whiteboard in my office, right? And I'm like we're going to write a list together of things we would change about the world. So what do you think they might say to me? You can shout back to me at this portion. More privileges, okay? More freedom. Yeah. What else?
More time with their parents.
Yeah.
Listen to.
More direction.
More direction?
No correction. Yeah. It often centers around life feels pretty unfair. I feel like my freedom's being taken away. And it centers around sometimes like I feel like the authorities in my life are pretty hypocritical, right? They're saying one thing and doing something else, right? And the reason why I do it like that is like, I want to be able to find the values and be able to work from that because there's that pattern that runs through this. And so you think about it with a young adult, right? You're having a more serious conversation with a young adult. But I have young couples who come into my office and ask the question, should we get married? And obviously, when you're coming in and asking the question, should we get married, right, there's obviously a context where you had some questions about whether you should be, right? People don't come into my office and ask, should we get married, if they're absolutely convinced that they want to get married. They come into my office and go, how to get married. But you want to help them to build a life that lasts, that has a solid foundation. And so when you're preparing even a couple for marriage, do you want this marriage to be the real thing, not a performance? You want to build something that lasts for 50 years. Well, it's interesting. Again, Solomon is laying out the principles of life. And so again, this pattern runs through everything. Now, what does Proverbs assume? In each one of those 7 conversations, the structure is the same. He meets the young person at their point of desire. He names the foolish pathway, the one that promises to actually deliver but actually destroys. And he offers the wise pathway, the one that actually leads to where the heart is aimed. Proverbs assumes that a young people want good things: honor, friendship, wisdom, a good name, intimacy, competence, provision. And Proverbs builds a whole teaching method on those assumptions. And so that's how we've counseled teens for decades. It's what Rick Horn observed in that counseling room. It's what Solomon's been doing for 3,000 years for us through Proverbs. And it's what we have to learn how to do with children, with teenagers, with young adults. We meet them at the want. We show the pathway. Then we offer the better way. But how? Like, how do we actually do this? And so we've been working through, with all of our materials on counseling young people, we've been working through kind of a planned methodology. And I'm going to run through it real quick. I actually unpacked it last time in a fuller detail. And so if you didn't get that last time, we can make that available to you. But again, we use an acrostic, a plan, and we just would say this: if you're going to be effective in young people, every youth worker, every parent, if you're going to have conversations that matter, you're going to have a plan. And so we just break it down as this: the P is prepare. Before you speak into a young person's life, prepare yourself. Know the theology, know the developmental terrain. Check your own heart. Are you embarrassed, angry, reacting from your own fear? Solomon did not open his mouth before he understood the world he was entering. And preparation is the discipline of going second. You don't earn the right to speak by having the right answer. You earn it by having done the work before you walked into the room. But the second one is critical. And I'll just tell you this: it's hard to put on a listening posture, particularly with some teens or some boys or young kids who give short answers. Yet, we've got to be careful. We've got to take the time to listen. Hear the story before you correct it. Go to great lengths to hear the story. One of the things I'm constantly reminding our counselors is just slow down. Slow down. Slow the conversation down. Take the time to listen. And it is not wasted time. The time you listen proves that you love. And when we talk about speaking the truth in love, how did you prove that you loved? Well, you proved you loved by listening. The time you take to listen shows that you love. And so it is not wasted time. Hear the story before you correct it. The young person knows this. They've experienced it their entire life. Listening is not passive. It's the most active thing you can do because it communicates, I see you. I'm interested in what's happening in your heart. I want to know what you value, what you desire, not just what I think is happening. Listening earns the right to go deeper. So that's the L. The A is ask. And this is where we're going to be looking at a tool all day. We call it the heart question ladder. And 7 questions that trace the heart from the surface to the root and point back to Christ. So the ladder is a tool inside the A. It's what it looks like to do Proverbs, what Proverbs does. To meet a young person at their desire and walk them towards the wise pathway. So in one specific conversation, in one specific struggle, on one specific Tuesday afternoon, it's how do we walk through that in a moment? The end, we said, is next steps. And after listening and asking and building structure, conversations without structure fade by Wednesday. That's where you clarify what you must stop, what you must put on, how do you replace foolish habits. How do you establish accountability, set a review rhythm, aim at worship restoration? Again, we unpacked a lot of that in the session that we did early last month or 2 months ago. It's a young person who's being trained slowly and imperfectly to respond to life's pressures with faith instead of folly. So what do? We prepare, we listen, we ask questions, we take next steps. That's the superstructure. So every workshop you attend will walk through it, and every handout you receive, even today, is going to be organized around it, whether you're here for teens or whether you're dealing with the premarital topics in the other room. So, Proverbs gives us a pattern. Excuse me. Plan gives us the framework. Now, let me kind of walk you through the tool. The Heart Question Ladder is a 7-rung tool that walks a counselor or a parent or pastor or youth worker through the same Proverbs pattern. And so it lives inside our plan model, and it looks like, what does the ask part look like? And so we talk about 7 rungs of the ladder, okay? And so rung 1 is just what we would call reconstruct. Just asking the question, what happened? Walk me through it, right? Get the story before you go deeper. Just finding the facts. Taking the time. I remember it was frustrating sometimes as a child, right, when my brother, who was bad, would get me in trouble because he'd pull me into stuff, right? And I'd be like, he started it, right? Well, my parents didn't really care to hear the story, right? Because both of us were involved, right? Actually, they did care to hear the story. I'm just kidding, Mom and Dad. But you can imagine, right, that it's frustrating, okay? It's frustrating when you feel like you're falsely accused because people don't understand that the other person started it. Well, again, that may be true, and that might be the mitigating circumstances, but walking through what happened. So we reconstruct that. Rung 2 is the emotions. What were you feeling? Help them name several: fear, anger, shame, loneliness, boredom, rage, relief. Again, we're trying to give teenagers a vocabulary for what were you feeling? What did it make you feel? What were you feeling going into that moment that we're addressing? Rung 3 is the actions. What did you do? What did you do next? Tracing that thread. Rung 4 is desires. This is where the wise wants comes into play. What were you wanting in that moment? What were you hoping for, trying to get, escape, secure, protect? This is the wise wants rung. And this is where the conversation turns, right? Turns from the facts of what happened to the heart behind it. Rung 5 is beliefs. What does this say about you, about God, about the people involved? Underneath every action and desire is a belief, a theology. Rung 6 is consequences. What has this pattern been doing to you, to your sleep, to your conscience, to your relationships? Rung 7 is redirecting. If your next response was to trust God, if you were to get on the pathway that God gives you, what would that actually look like? Not today, or not someday, but tomorrow. So let's look at the ladder scale. So let's look at how this ladder kind of scales. Here's the thing about this tool that makes it powerful. It scales. The same 7 rungs work at every developmental stage. The questions change, the language changes, but the heart doesn't change. So rung 4, what did you want? Right? The motivational rung. It sounds different at every age. With a 5-year-old, it sounds like, what were you hoping would happen? Now, what about with a 15-year-old? What were you really looking for? Like, with a 25-year-old, what were you protecting? Same rung, same heart, 3 different developmental questions. 25-year-old, I'm protecting my reputation. I'm protecting my freedom. I'm protecting my... Well, there's a greater level of sophistication with what they're doing. But still, that same desire. So rung 4 is the theological center of the ladder, where this young person can name what they want and see that it ended rather than simply desired. They're no longer just in trouble. They're in a discipleship moment. And that's the John moment. You are highly motivated. You want something so bad that you're willing to endure remarkable pain to get it. You want a relationship so bad you're willing to put up with a toxic boyfriend to keep a companion. Right? And so there's this fear of losing my toxic boyfriend. So, Rung 1 to 3 earns the right to ask rung 4. If you skip them, the young person knows you haven't actually heard their story. So you can't skip rungs 1 through 3 and go right to rung 4. But rungs 5 through 7 is where Proverbs kind of comes home. The pathway you're on is destroying the very thing that you want. Let's get on a better pathway. So I'm going to give you an example real quick. So let me give you a composite here. A 10-year-old boy has been getting into fights at school. I actually had this situation. I counseled this exact case this week. Okay? His parents are embarrassed. His teacher's frustrated. He's being threatened to be kicked out of after-school care because he keeps getting in fights. And everyone's focused on the behavior. What does his dad want me to tell him? Will you stop hitting other kids? Like, we need you to be in aftercare in school, right? Dad's got work till 5 o'clock. He picks him up at 5:30. It works out great, right? You can't have a 10-year-old kid at home alone by themselves, right? Like, this has to work, right? Like, you're going to create all sorts of problems and difficulty for this family if you don't make this work. Now, you think about, how do we reconstruct what happened? What happened right before the fight? Well, he's playing basketball, and another kid made fun of him because he shot an air ball. Air ball. Right? So what does he feel? Embarrassed? Angry? All the kids are laughing at him. He shot a free throw and he shot an air ball. He looked like an idiot. So what did you do? Well, I went up and shoved the kid. Right? Got under the basket. He's going up for a rebound, and I just boom, shoved him right into the pole. Well, what do you want in that moment? Like, I wanted them to stop making fun of me, stop laughing. I wanted them to think that I was tough. Well, do you hear that? What did he want? Ultimately, he wanted respect. He wanted honor. He wanted not to be humiliated in front of his peers. And those are not evil desires. He didn't intentionally shoot an air ball. But those are the same desires Solomon writes about in Proverbs 4:8. She will honor you. The desire is God-given. The pathway, shoving another kid, is foolish. It won't get him what he wants. In fact, it will destroy the very reputation that he's trying to build. Now imagine, I just opened with, haven't you ever heard, keep your hands to yourself, kid? Stop hitting. Enough said, right? It's correct, it's true. It's utterly useless because he's heard it 98 times already that week from his teachers at school. It's written on the wall of every fourth grade classroom, isn't it? Keep your hands to yourself. Now, the problem is, like, you might say, you want people to respect you. That's a real desire. The problem is that what you did today made them respect you less, not more. Let me show you what it actually looks like to earn the kind of respect that lasts. Now that you're doing what Solomon does, you're counseling from Proverbs. You think about a 15-year-old girl who's been pulling away from her family. She's up late on her phone every night. Her grades are slipping. She's snapping at her mother. She stopped going to youth group. Her mom thinks it's depression. She's depressed. I need you to talk with her. Well, not just, hey, tell me why you're depressed. But walk me through the last few weeks. What's been going on? And you listen. And her best friend moved away in August. She was in a group chat with 3 girls that now have kicked her out of the group chat. And now they're posting things on Instagram about places they're going that she used to be invited to and she's not invited to anymore. And it hurts. She's been eating lunch alone. Well, what's that been like? It's been lonely. It's been embarrassing. I'm angry at the friends who seem to have forgotten about me. Well, what do you do with all that? I just scroll. I just look through my phone. Hours and hours. Sit at the lunch table. Over and over again. And when you're scrolling at midnight, watching these girls live a life you're not part of, what are you hoping for? What are you looking for? I guess I'm looking for someone to tell me that I matter, that I'm important. Well, we don't move off of that. We don't race to say, like, how do we fix that? That's a real desire. You were made for that. God made you to belong. God made you to matter. And that's not wrong. The question is whether the road you're on, the scrolling, the comparing, the 2 a.m. spiral, the isolating, is actually going to get you what you long for. And that's the Proverbs move. It meets the desire. Name the foolish pathway, offer the wise one. The same Solomon who said, nothing you desire can compare with her, is speaking to this girl through you. And there's something better than the phone at midnight. And it starts with being known by the God who sees her, ultimately finding her security and deepest companionship in the Lord. Yet pursuing companionship in a wise way. And still pursuing that. So, that's the arc of the book of Proverbs. It begins with the simple, the untrained person who doesn't know yet the difference between wisdom and folly. It moves through the 7 "Hear my son" conversations, each one that meets a desire and offers a wise pathway, and it ends at worship. Proverbs 1:7 begins, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." But Proverbs 9:10 concludes this way, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight." Ultimately, the fear of the Lord leads us to know God. That the path to wisdom leads to the Lord. The method has a destination. Wisdom doesn't just start with the desires, it ends with the throne. Do you get that? Wisdom ends with the knowledge of the holy, of God. And the destination is the same whether you're working with a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, or a 25-year-old. Ultimately, Proverbs is about a heart that worships, fears, and worships God. That's what we're after, not better behavior, not quieter children, not more compliant teenagers, not more impressive young adults. We're after worship, the reorientation of our heart toward the God who made it and the God who satisfies it. And this is why the approach I've been describing, it's not a permissive approach. It's not just some therapy technique for young people to make them feel good about themselves. It's the hardest kind of work there is because it aims at the throne of the heart. Behavior change without worship change will be temporary. Do you get that? Just simply choosing to do better things without changing your heart will have temporary results. It's the hardest kind of work there is. But worship change, when a young person's heart turns from counterfeit to real, from a foolish pathway to a wise one, from self-worship to God worship, that is transformation. And that's ultimately what the book of Proverbs is designed to lay out. Why I love using the book of Proverbs with teens is this. Is that they often have questions about God. They have questions about the world. And Proverbs enters into their world and leads them to God. The reason why I can say to the young person who tells me, man, I wish there was world peace, and I can be like, you know what? The God of the universe does too. Like, he's passionate about that. I wish things were fair. Well, the God who designed the world actually is working towards justice. And he's angered by the greed and sin and politics and all of this that frustrate you. This world frustrates him. Yet, what's our goal? Our goal is ultimately to be aligned with God's purposes in our life. Think about how Jesus worked. We're just going to end with this. You know, Jesus comes to the woman at the well. He didn't open by naming her sin. He opened by asking her for water. Then he offered her living water. Then he named the longing no man had ever satisfied. Then she ran back to the village and said, come, see this man who told me everything I ever did. You think about Zacchaeus. Jesus didn't open the lecture on extortion. He said, I'm coming to your house today. The welcome came before the lecture. And what Zacchaeus just repented on his own from the kindness. The prodigal's father running down the road before the son had even finished his confession was drawing near. It's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance, not the sternness, the kindness. The long, patient kindness that sees us where we are, names the good and invites us home. And so, when we think about how do we help young people, this is the wisdom approach. It's not a technique. It's not a program. It's a posture. It's what Solomon did. It's what we do as biblical counselors. It's what Jesus did. And it's what the workshops you'll attend in this conference are designed to help you do. With every young person God has placed in your care at every age and every struggle. So I just want to send you out of here with this. Somewhere right now, there's a young person in your life, maybe a child, maybe a teenager, maybe a young adult, who's on the edge of maybe a marriage or a career or a crisis of faith or went through a difficult week. Maybe that young person is making foolish choices, maybe enraging ones, maybe heartbreaking to you. Maybe you've been trying to reach them for a while. But underneath all of those choices is a wise want, a God-given want, distorted by sin, but still real, still there, still reachable. And what's our goal? Our goal is do the hard work of finding that wise want. Name what is good about it. Walk them up the ladder, and then ultimately point them to the only one who can satisfy a human heart. We point young people to Jesus because he's the one who gives us the water where we never thirst. The longings of a child's heart are met in Jesus. That's our goal. Show them Jesus. But wisdom is a means, is a pathway to help them to see it, right? And then to live it. And so Proverbs 23:26 concludes this. My son, give me your heart and let your eyes observe my ways. God's after our heart. He says, above all else, guard your heart, right? For from it flow the issues of life. So again, we're talking about reaching the heart and pointing kids to Jesus through wisdom. And I think Proverbs gives us great insight into do that. So today, we're going to actually give you two options. There's going to be some workshops in here. Pastor Jonathan Skirtu is a youth pastor in Niles, Illinois. And he also has he's got some advanced degrees in biblical counseling. He's actually in the PhD program in biblical counseling at Southern Seminary now. And are you officially in it now? I'm in it. He's in it. Okay, good. I don't know how many degrees he has. He has a lot. So he has other degrees besides the PhD that he's getting. But he has a lot of experience, honestly, working with young people and a heart for that. And so he's going to be doing some workshops in here on teens. This morning we're looking at anxiety and sexual integrity. And then Pastor Matt Black, who is actually in the PhD program at Midwestern University, Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City, is going to be doing some sessions on how to prepare young people, young adults for marriage. And so he's going to be walking through 8 sessions today on how do you systematically have conversations with young people who might be considering marriage, whether they're engaged or whether they are even just at a point where they're considering, should we get married? And so our goal by the end of the day would be that you would have a good understanding of how to have effective conversations, kind of a systematic plan, and a bunch of resources. And he's actually got a whole resource folder for that. And then in here, Jonathan's going to speak this afternoon. Esther St. John from our staff. She's our Spanish training coordinator, but she's actually going to be speaking in English this afternoon, not Spanish. But she studied at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary as well. And she works with a lot of the youth up at our Schaumburg location. And she's going to be talking on depression and self-injury this afternoon, and then on kind of intrusive thoughts and how do you control crazy thinking in teenagers. And so, and then we're going to have lunch and kind of fellowship in between. And those of you online, I'm sorry you can't have lunch with us, but you can have lunch where you're at. Order Uber Eats or something to treat yourself. But thank you for everyone who took the time to kind of join us today. I'm going to close this session in prayer, and then we will prepare for our breakouts, okay? God, thank you for this opportunity to come together. God, it is so important that we learn how to care for young people with the heart of Christ. We are grateful that you sent your son, that you're a good father, that you care about us, God, we want to communicate that care to the people that we love. So God, use this time today to be a source of encouragement, to be a source of learning, so that all of us may be more equipped to accomplish the purposes that you've called us to. In your name, amen.